I am Jessica TIWARI. I am a longtime member of the product team at UPWORK. As a side note, I actually went to school right around here, and I haven't been back to Cleveland in an embarrassingly long time. So I just wanted to take a second to give a quick shout out to the industry team. Thank you so much for allowing me to participate in this really amazing conference. So, why are we here? Distributed teams are hardly a novel concept. People have been working with remote colleagues for decades. The reason that this continues to be a hot topic of conversation is that the competition for talent is intensifying. So we are in a period of historically low unemployment, and what that means is employers are having an increasingly hard time finding the people that they need to fulfill their strategic objectives. In addition, as I'm sure you have all experienced, hiring takes an extremely long time. The average opening in an enterprise company takes 40 days to fill, and that number skyrockets up to 90 days for the highly skilled, more difficult to fill positions. The reason that these jobs are taking an increasingly long time to fill is that hiring managers are having a difficult time finding people with the right skill set that matches their needs. The survey that we ran in 2017 had a 53% response rate for hiring managers that believed that access to skills was one of their top hiring challenges. So, because of these trends, companies are leaning on flexible work arrangements more and more heavily. And as a result, they're constantly looking for ways to make those work arrangements as successful as possible. And UPWORK is one of those companies. We are the world's largest freelancing marketplace. But more important to this conversation is that UPWORK freelancers also build UPWORK remotely using UPWORK, the platform. This is a practice that dates back to our two founders in 2003, who were located in the Bay Area and in Greece. The company has grown over time to 1,400 people, spread over 708 cities in 78 different countries. We are more or less fully distributed, not just the product team. Every team at the company has at least some people that are not co-located. Our headquarters are based in the Bay Area, and you can imagine how much fun it is trying to attract and retain talent with Apple, Google, Facebook, and 2,000 of the next top startups percolating in your backyard. Distributed work is not a cost-saving technique for UPWORK, it is our competitive advantage. Remote work is the reason that we are successful and that we are able to thrive. We have lots of teams that have tried out many different remote work techniques over the many years that we've been trying this. And what we found is that there are three primary components to a successful distributed product team. And those are your hiring practices, your technology, and your culture. We're going to cover the most important attributes of each of these three in this conversation. And they act like a three-legged stool. If any one of these is wobbly, the whole team is going to flop. So let's start with hiring. I grabbed this quote from a design consultancy that does a lot of blogging and writing on remote work best practices. About a year ago, I made peace with my business partner's decision to hire a new team member without ever having met the candidate in person. 99% of our work interactions are done remotely, so for some positions, it was more important to hire based on the remote version of the person than the in-person version of the person. I love this quote because it forces the reader to think about what are the differences between the remote version of a person and the in-person version of a person. For which roles do those differences actually matter? And in doing so, it helps illustrate some of the biases that we tend to apply to all hiring that can be smoothed over when you're hiring remote. It's true that the things that you notice in your co-located colleagues, those things that are the most visible and obvious to you, are different than the things that you notice in a distributed team. For example, how late was Bob at work last night? Or who's chatting at the water cooler versus working at their desks? Absent those visual cues, what we tend to notice in a distributed team is their responsiveness and the quality and the quantity of the work product that they deliver. I love to pick on height because it's one of those things that translates extremely poorly across a video call. You have no idea how tall the person is that you're working with on the other side of the phone. I'm always shocked every time I meet them the first time in person. Research has shown that people that are 6 feet tall make on average $166,000 more over their 30-year careers than people that are 5 foot 5 inches. I don't know about you, but I have a hypothesis that what drives the success of a product team has more to do with the quality and the quantity of the work output that they deliver than with their height. Maybe. The other thing that I love about that quote that I totally agree with is that it implies that in order to be wildly successful with a distributed product team, you need to figure out remote hiring, not just support your in-person colleagues as they move farther away from the offices. This is 100% the case, and it brings us to the top 5 most critical traits that I have found for bringing on new remote talent. First, precisely skilled. When you drop the location requirement, you're able to find people that have the exact skills that you need for the job posting at hand. This is important because even though we have had success reskilling people as our needs change over time, you need someone that has a skill that you can immediately apply in order to assess the rest of these traits, right? So self-accountable or self-disciplined and accountable, you're not going to be there to look over these people's shoulders to make sure that they're managing their time wisely or that they are taking proper ownership over the product areas that they own. You need to make sure that the people that you're bringing on have that accountability and that self-discipline already ingrained. Collaborative and flexible. As a remote team member, you are going to get more surprised than people that are located all in a single office. And this is true even in companies that try very hard to be as transparent as possible and minimize those surprises. It's just one of the things that is more difficult to do with a distributed team. Because of that, it is easier if you're able to attract people that are highly accessible, that are very collaborative, and that are flexible, the type of people that can roll with the punches as the change comes their way. There are other traits that you'll need to worry about that wouldn't be the case in on-premise employment, such as a person's willingness to work a few hours of overlap, whether or not they have an established remote work routine, access to consistent internet, high-speed broadband, good video cameras. Generally speaking, if you're trying to bring on someone who's already remote, they probably have all of those things already in place. You can kind of take it as a given at that point that they'll have those structures and you don't really need to worry about it. Lastly, no, I guess that's pretty much it. Yeah, okay, cool. So one of the things that I hear all the time is it must be so hard to build a product team on top of remote individuals with them up and leaving all the time. And I think this is kind of an interesting assumption. What I have found is that if you see that your remote team members are churning at a faster clip than your in-person team members, you might be doing something wrong. The best remote work companies that I know of are able to bend their practices and their positions so that where they are hiring, they are both the best gig in town and working with the people that are the best for their company. So you can only really be successful if you are reaching out to people where and for whom you can be the best gig in town. Unless you think this is all about the money, I give you this stat, 42%. Every year, Upwork participates in a Freelancing in America survey. This is a survey that goes out to a broad swath of US-based freelancers and asks them different things about how work is going for them, what are their prospects for the future, that sort of thing. In the most recent survey, 42% of the respondents said that they would not consider traditional on-premise employment for any amount of money, would not or could not take those jobs. What does this mean for us? There is an entire pool of relevant talent that isn't even considering all of those jobs that we are madly posting in the industry attendee Slack channel. And in order to access this talent, you're going to need to bring the right technology. I worked remote for a decade prior to joining Upwork, and I can tell you that the caliber and the potential of remote workers has not changed. What has changed, the most important thing that has changed, is the philosophy and the opinions of those people who used to believe that one's best work could not be done outside of an office. And the technology that has enabled that change is that we can all now see each other. And this has put a huge damper on the working in Jamie's trend, which is a real thing, But it's been wonderful for building trust between remote colleagues and on-premise colleagues. If you want to take the next step towards a more fully distributed team, the technology that you empower your team with is going to be crucial. And it does not need to look like this. Don't get me wrong, virtual reality, augmented reality is empowering. Holographic projection is really incredible. Blazingly fast broadband, 4K video, these are really amazing tools. And remote work is going to get easier and easier as that technology becomes more mainstream. But those technologies are not blockers to starting to work more distributed today. This is the stuff that we actually use. And you could replace any of these tools with any number of other tools that meet these needs. It's the problems that they're trying to solve that need to be dealt with. So starting off, you can't be successful with a distributed team if you aren't able to support free-form, asynchronous communication. We use a proprietary chat and video calling platform. You could replace that with Slack, Microsoft Teams. There's dozens of options out there, but that's the problem that you're trying to solve. Similarly, you can't be successful with a remote team if you don't have tools to support asynchronous execution, project management, asynchronous deployment, things like that. We use Jira and Confluence along with a handful of engineering tools. There are other options. It's very difficult to properly engage remote colleagues if they are not all on an equal playing field in meetings. We use Google Hangouts, mostly because it integrates so nicely into our offices. There are many other tools, and I would argue that the more distributed you get, the more options there are in this arena. It's also very difficult, or almost impossible, to properly engage with a remote team if you're not using a platform that's devoted to remote collaboration. We use Google Suite. Documentation is extremely important, collaborative documentation. When it comes to distributed teams, this one's a real killer. You'll need to have a good solution in place for that. The rest of these, they get increasingly more optional the farther down you go on the list. We love to engage our distributed team members in exactly the same way that we would engage with in-person colleagues when it comes to brainstorming, ideation, design thinking. We've found that tools like Miro, Real-Time Board are great. They're structured enough and unstructured enough to involve whole teams together in that sort of a brainstorming and ideation environment. Similarly, everyone needs to be engaged in the design process. We use Envision. The comment capabilities are great for collecting asynchronous feedback from remote team members. Video, this last one, we try to communicate in as many ways as possible with our distributed team. And what we found is that video is particularly good at communicating more than just the documentation. So we're increasingly using more video sound bites, like small video updates when it comes to strategic updates, trying to distribute the recorded meetings that we have so that people can get more context and a deeper understanding of our strategy and our vision and the rationale behind it. Please note, none of this technology is budget breaking, and it is not difficult to access. The best remote work companies are the ones that bend their practice and their process just a little bit to the point where the technology that they have access to can empower great work. And on that, let me come to one of our least successful technology endeavors. One thing that never works is when you try to engage with your remote team exactly the same way that you would engage with an in-person colleague. I bring you the telepresence robot. We had a few of these rolling around our offices a few years ago. And with this technology, we were able to find a way to make our open plan offices even more distracting. Hard to do. We also were able to empower our remote teams with that feeling of always being late to a meeting. Also, not something that we were shooting for. We kept these guys around for a couple of months. They started collecting dust, and then mercifully they went into storage. It didn't work for us. And the reason that it didn't work for us is that you cannot be successful as a remote-first company if, in order for you to pay attention to someone, they need to have a physical presence in your office. This is an example of a technology that is trying to treat all of your remote people as though they were in person. You need to embrace the remote and figure out how that could make your work more productive. And that brings us to culture. Timely reminder from the founders of Basecamp. You don't need everyone physically together to create a strong culture. The best cultures derive from the actions that people actually take. So you've hired the right people, you've provided them the right tools. Your culture is what dictates how you use those tools to empower your people to build incredible product. I have found that there are 3 traits that are commonly shared across all the remote-first companies that I've looked into, including Upwork. They tend to be transparent, they tend to be metrics-driven, and they tend to be egalitarian. So we'll spend some time talking about how those traits might actually manifest in different companies. Transparent. Remote teams do better when they're given a clear vision and the autonomy to figure out how to reach that vision on their own. What product to build, how to build the product, what do they think is the best potential for achieving that vision. We try as hard as possible to communicate our vision in as many different ways as we can so that everyone starts with a clear understanding of where we're trying to go and how we're trying to get there. The reason for that is we find that common baseline helps us keep the product consistent while allowing teams the autonomy to figure out what they want to build and how they want to build it to achieve their goals. Feature retrospectives. It is much easier to hide your mistakes as a distributed team. I know this is already a problem even in office environments, but it's even easier to hide your mistakes as a distributed team. To combat this, you need to make sure that your culture is embracing a growth mindset and that you are celebrating learnings as much as you are celebrating success. So the way that we deal with this is by having feature retrospectives. Every feature, no matter how big or how small, if we learned from it, and we should learn from all of them, we're going to share those learnings broadly so that there's no stigma attached to something not going the way that you expected it to. As long as you learned, that's a success. Lastly, it's also incredibly difficult to know how everyone is feeling in a distributed culture. It's much easier to hide your feelings. This is a particular challenge, and I know that this is arguably even harder in offices. With distributed cultures, it's just even more important that you figure out ways to convince people to tell you how things are really going on an ongoing basis. We have lots of different feedback gathering techniques, some structured, some unstructured. We also are constantly emphasizing the importance of feedback and actively trying to collect that from people as often as possible. I do have a kind of embarrassing story about this. I actually just got back from one of our team meetups in Madrid yesterday. It's the first one we've had in a year and a half. And on arriving, I'm polishing what I want to say for these slides, and I learned that one of the teams that I'm meeting up with actually is having these problems and has been struggling with some of the strategic and personnel changes that have been happening over the past year. I guess the point of this is that this is not something that you can ever do perfectly. It is always something that you need to keep your eye on. Even those of us that would love to be considered experts in this area still have a long way to go towards making sure that we are always aware and we are always on top of how people are feeling and how work is progressing in our distributed teams. Metrics driven. As I mentioned earlier, remote teams do best when they have a clear vision and autonomy to implement that vision in the way they see fit. One of the ways that we try to set things up for our teams is giving them very clear goals along with that very clear strategic vision. We're fortunate in that the way that we make money is very closely aligned to our mission. So we don't have to worry as much about setting a goal that could lead to bad decisions. But we do spend a lot of time framing up our goals and trying to make sure that they're the sorts of things that are attainable and that will drive people to good decisions for the business and for our community. That said, we don't want to send all of our teams off into the ether with no guidance, especially the newer teams. So we also spend an enormous amount of time on problem framing. Is this a problem worth solving? Does solving this problem align with the company's strategic vision? Is the problem what we should be solving right now? What would success look like? What might failure look like, et cetera? We find that with this sort of framework, we're able to guide people towards success while still allowing them the freedom to build what they want, what they believe in, and what they think they can learn the most from. Being metrics-driven also heavily influences what and how we celebrate. I can give a couple of examples. Because we are a highly metrics-driven company, we tend not to celebrate tenure. We also tend not to celebrate launches. So you don't get points just for launching the feature. You get points for learning from a launch, or when that launch influences a metric that you were targeting, but the launch alone is not something that we generally celebrate. Lastly, egalitarian. One common trait across many remote-first companies is that they tend to be relatively flat, or they tend to be the sort of culture where hierarchy is greatly disregarded. Upwork falls into the latter half. It's very difficult to be on the leadership team at Upwork if you're expecting people to just agree with you. This is great for transparency and for communication. I don't think that it's actually a blocker to being a remote-first company. These other things are the things that really will make a difference. Equal access to information. As I mentioned previously, it is extremely important with distributed cultures that you are documenting everything. If you have a smaller meeting, not everyone that needs to know the answer is present, or you're making decisions by the water cooler, all of those decisions must be well documented with rationale and available for public comment. We do this through Google Drive. We have everything on there. We have strategic documents on there. We have design documents on there. Everything is available. Everyone can see everything, and we are constantly referring back to those comments over time. Meeting management. You have to be a remote-friendly culture. So for us, that means that every single meeting has a meet. We assume that there will be remote colleagues in every single meeting. We try to avoid situations where you have 8 people in a room and 1 person who's remote. That's not set up for success for the 1 person who's remote. In that sort of a situation, we'll generally have people carve off and join the meeting from their desks. So it'll be a more even playing field. We try to always have our video cameras on for those people that need the facial connection, like eye contact connection. We try to have the notes from the meeting projected and live updated so that people can feel heard and ensure that they're understanding everything that's going on in the meeting. Things like that. Async all the things. So as a distributed team, those hours of overlap that you have between your office or yourself and your colleagues are precious. They can't be used to unblock execution. They have to be used for strategy. They have to be used for brainstorming. They have to be used for ideation and for those things that are really difficult to do while distributed. So, in order to be successful, you need to set up processes that unblock people from getting their day job done, even if they had no hours of overlap. Ideally, to do your day job, you should not require any hours of overlap, so that all of that time that's overlapping is available for the strategic future of the company, the discussion of the feature, those things that are really impossible to do asynchronously. Lastly, one thing that I've seen in basically every remote company that I've had experience with is the concept of a team meetup. This is sort of a concentrated team building activity where your office-based people and your remote-based people get together. It's primarily to get things done, but it's also for team building and for building trust. To provide an example of how Upwork structures these, we try to have them away from all office locations, remote or in person, so that everyone is on an equal playing field. Everyone is in a place that they don't know very well. Everyone is sort of in the same position, and it's not that you get all of the distractions that you get if you're having a meetup in your office, where you're still having all the same meetings, you're still going home at the end of the day. It's just much more difficult to get that concentrated bonding experience if half the people are home. We also try to structure it so that half the time is team bonding and sort of process evolution and figuring out what's going to work best for the team, and the other half is just trying to get your day jobs done. And the reason for that is that our remote teammates have this figured out. They know what the struggles are. They know how to do their job remote. It's the office-based people that need to experience what it's like to try to get your job done when you're many hours removed from your home office. We want to give them that experience so that they can be more empathetic and come up with good ideas so that when you go back to home, you're able to work with your team more effectively and to really understand where they're coming from. This is one example. This is the enterprise team from a couple of years ago from a meetup that we had in Lisbon. Our enterprise team is responsible for an extremely complex enterprise two-sided marketplace. It is a difficult product. It's a difficult problem. It's a lot of complexity and a lot of work. At the time, this team was 25 people representing 20 cities across 15 different countries. Many of them have been working together for 5 years or more, and collectively they are shaping and defining and building our enterprise product. It can be done. So, key takeaways. It's late. I'll give you the short version here. Thing number 1, hire remote. So if you have never tried, just give it a chance. You could be amazed at the talent and the caliber of people that you have been missing. Thing number 2, you have all the technology that you need. The technology to enable distributed teams is widely available, and chances are you are already using most of it. It's the process and the practice that you have in place around those tools that are going to enable your teams to be successful. Thing number 3, the future of work is already here. There is some urgency around this. Being distributed, hiring remote, can only give you a competitive advantage until it becomes completely mainstream. And we are well on our way there, so don't miss the bus. With that, I'd like to wrap up. Thank you so much for your time and for sticking around, and I will be at the talk shop later. I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone has. Thank you.